Good morning. I am Dr. Francesco Spilabotte from University of Cassino, and this is our paper entitled Psychology and Literature: Some Psychological Reflections on Doña Rosita la Soltera by García Lorca. This work aims to show the reader an introspective analysis of the Spanish poet and playwright Federico García Lorca, one of the pioneers of the artistic avant-garde in Europe who died at the hands of nationalist forces. The study, therefore, offers some considerations of a psychological nature, especially on the drama Doña Rosita la Soltera or El lenguaje de las flores, with particular attention and consideration to the characters within the work, as products of his creativity, and to the recurring themes proposed within his works, such as Eros and Thanatos. The specific objectives of the studies are recognizing and analyzing the creative element in the creation of Federico García Lorca literary works, analyzing and studying the main character Donna Rosita together with the characters that revolve around her, as well as the peculiar and significant aspects and characteristics present in the work, enriching a literary text with meaning and content by translating apparent incomprehensible elements into concepts, identify and recognize the recurring and most significant symbols in the writer's works and present work. The study was conducted by analyzing literary and psychological texts concerning past and contemporary artists and writers, analyzing the short story from a psychological perspective. The line we followed is that indicated by the psychology of art and literature, a discipline founded by Professor Antonio Fusco. The research methodology essentially tends to integrate in the critical interpretative reading of the literary text the assumptions proper to the psychoanalytic perspective with the broader pool of the contemporary psychological theories. The methodology a priori excludes a dogmatic interpretative reading of the text in order to contribute to a clearer and simpler interpretation of the literary message. The drama focuses on Donna Rosita's love for her cousin, who lives in Spain to attend to family affairs in South America in Tucumán. The latter will never return to marry her as he had sworn. The title of the work clearly takes the name of the protagonist, but with an obvious diminutive that contributes to giving the main character characteristics of fragility and at the same time sweetness and innocence. The title implies the meaning of how time is ruthless and unstoppable, with no respect for the figure of Rosita. Within the title, there is a contrast between her youth and simultaneously a condemnation, spinsterhood. The work emphasizes and highlights the inexorable passing of time. The protagonist plays a passive role, there is a lack of action. At the beginning of the story, Rosita's uncle refers to the mutable Rose, the housekeeper. Rosita essentially follows the change of this rose. It becomes the symbol of ephemeral life as well as a sexuality, embodying the brief existence that peels little by little like a rose. The characteristics of the mutable rose is that it lives only one day. The play introduces the changing rose that appears in the first act, in the second act, and at the end in the third, because it represents the allegory of the protagonist's life. The drama is basically set in a house which gradually becomes a prison for the inhabitants who are worried about voices and the garden, on the contrary, becomes a refugee in which they can take shelter. In the second act, there is a meeting contrast between Rosita's uncle and Mrs. Hicks, an economics professor, one of Nisi's main suitors, but because of different outlooks on life, he is practically at odds with her. Rosita is always awaiting the return of her beloved and the arrival of the postman so that she can receive good news from her cousin. The third and final act opens in a sad atmosphere as evening is approaching. Meanwhile, another 10 years have passed. Finally, there is one of the most significant monologues in all of contemporary Spanish literature, that of Rosita who kneels before her aunt. All this represents renunciation and confession of the existential drama. Rosita admits everything, both deception and illusion, and pretends to believe until the end. In her lies the hope of the distant cousin and the possible marriage. What is interesting is how the eyes, which represent the mirror of the soul, remain the same. The body does not, she has grown old. Gradually the rose begins to unfurl. Eventually Rosita arrives dressed in white like the rose with a coat. Rosita faints and leans back in her chair. The rose is losing its petals. The play may well be considered a bourgeois drama, as it is about the minimally unimportant fly-by-night life of one spinster among many, namely Rosita. As time goes by, she will become an increasingly useless person. The theme of sexual sterility and emotional loneliness also recurs in this opera, representing the core of Lorcan poetics. On the basis of the considerations and studies we have carried out, it could be seen how the creative element in Garcia Lorca was able to skillfully assist in a ironic key, a perfect synthesis between imagination and reality. The psychology of art and literature, the discipline from which we started, evinces and emphasizes the importance of knowing and the biography of the author and the motivations that prompted him to create a literary work while taking into account the historical and cultural period in which he lived, allowing for a more explicative and exhaustive study of his creative methods and characters. Behind this wall of silence, Rosita sees the years of her youth passing by the melancholy of fleeting time, which will fade away in the vain expectation of the fiancé who will not return, and like the mutable rose, when night becomes, will slowly and finally peel away. Thank you for your attention.